Dusk softened the late afternoon sun, painting long, contorted shadows across the convenience store's cracked asphalt lot. $5. Lily's small, damp hand clutched the crumpled bill, its edges frayed from anxious fiddling. It felt like a king's ransom, and simultaneously, woefully inadequate. A cloying blend of stale coffee and overripe fruit wafted from the automatic doors, doing little to ease the knot in her stomach. She was so small, so quiet. Her plan, so grand and improbable. Her gaze remained fixed on the grimy glass, a silent vigil. A low rumble, initially distant, swelled to a thunderous roar, vibrating through the ground. It rattled the loose pebbles beneath her worn sneakers and shook the struggling sapling planted optimistically beside the entrance. Lily's head snapped up, wide blue eyes tracking the sound's source. A massive, chrome-gleaming motorcycle rounded the far corner. It was a mechanical beast, all polished steel and dark leather, its engine a living entity spitting raw power into the air. The rider, equally formidable, dismounted with a liquid grace surprising for his bulk. A black leather vest stretched taut across his broad chest, emblazoned with a winged skull and the curving legend, Vagabond's MC. A heavy chain wallet swung from his hip, and his thick, scuffed boots landed with a solid thud. His face remained shrouded by a dark helmet until he removed it, revealing a grizzled beard, a formidable jaw, and eyes that, even from afar, seemed to bore through everything. This was Rex Bulldog Miller. He ran a hand over his mostly bald scalp before hooking the helmet on his handlebars. His presence was palpable, radiating an unshakable confidence, a man defining his own terms. Other patrons entering and exiting gave him a wide berth, their eyes quickly averting his. Lily, however, couldn't look away. He was precisely what she needed, or what she desperately hoped she needed. He moved towards the entrance, his strides long and unhurried. As he passed the ice machine, its hum a counterpoint to the distant traffic, his sharp, assessing gaze swept the lot. It snagged on Lily. She froze, a tiny petrified statue by the sapling. For a moment, she thought he might disregard her, dismiss her as just another child. But his eyes, a surprisingly light gray, lingered. A corner of his mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly upward. No full smile, not even close, but a slight softening around the edges of his grim expression. A fleeting acknowledgement. It was enough. It was an unspoken invitation. Lily inhaled deeply, shakily, the scent of gasoline and exhaust fumes filling her small lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum urging her forward. This was it. The moment. She pushed away from the sapling, her small legs propelling her towards the imposing biker. Each step felt monumental, her sneakers scuffing softly on the asphalt. Rex was reaching for the convenience store door handle when he caught the faint scuff behind him. He paused, hands suspended. He'd noticed the child, a wisp of a thing, standing like a lost fledgling. Something in her posture, in the way she clutched that wad of green, had piqued his interest. He turned slowly, his large frame casting a long shadow over her. Lily stopped a respectful distance away, her chin tilted to meet his gaze without straining. Her small face was serious, almost solemn, framed by light brown wisps escaping her braids. The $5 bill now seemed fused to her palm, a talisman against the enormity of her task. "Excuse me, sir?" Her voice was a breathy whisper, reedy and thin like dry leaves rustling, almost instantly swallowed by the distant thrum of traffic. Rex raised an eyebrow, a silent cue to continue. He crossed his arms, the leather of his vest creaking softly. He He waited, his expression unreadable, but the subtle amusement had returned to his eyes, a faint sparkle. Lily swallowed hard, her throat suddenly parched. I need some help. She extended the crumpled $5 bill, her arms stiff and straight, as if offering a fragile, precious gift. It's really important. Her gaze darted from the money to his face, searching for any sign of comprehension, of willingness, an innocent faith in the kindness of strangers, even intimidating ones, shone in her eyes, a belief still, miraculously, intact. Rex glanced at the money, then back at her earnest face. $5. Not even enough for a decent burger. What kind of trouble could a kid her size be in that $5 would solve? A lost cat? A broken toy? His mind, accustomed to assessing threats and devising solutions for far more serious problems, shifted. Curiosity flickered, replacing his usual hardened neutrality. This was a novel situation. He uncrossed his arms, letting them drop. Important, huh? His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly gentle despite its gravelly timbre, a deep vibration settling in the air. What kind of important? He didn't reach for the money, waiting. He observed her closely, noting the faint tremor in her hand, the brave yet fearful hint in her eyes, an underlying current of worry deeper than a simple request. This wasn't a game. This was real to her. Lily took another bolstering breath. It's about my mommy and daddy. The words tumbled out, a rush of urgent honesty. She looked up at him, blue eyes wide and earnest, her small face a mixture of hope and desperation. I need you to please make my daddy stop hitting my mommy. The words hung in the air, shockingly stark, innocent, devastating. The subtle amusement in Rex's eyes vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, hard glint. His jaw tightened, muscles flexing under his beard. His casual posture evaporated. He was no longer just a biker hearing out a curious child. He was Rex Bulldog Miller, and a deep, primal anger, long dormant, began to stir. The $5 bill, still extended in Lily's small hand, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, imbued with a weight far beyond its monetary value. This was no lost cat. This was something entirely different, something demanding action. He reached out, his large hand gently closing over her tiny one, taking the crumpled bill. His gaze, now fierce and unwavering, met hers. Consider it done, kid, he rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. The faintest hint of a smile, grim and resolute, touched his lips. Consider it very, very done. The important question. The scent of stale coffee and exhaust fumes clung to the humid air as Lily, her small frame barely visible against the hulking chrome of Rex's motorcycle, took a deep breath. Her hand, balled into a tight fist, felt damp around the crumpled $5 bill. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the distant rumble of traffic on the highway. She knew this was important, more important than anything she'd ever done. Rex, oblivious, was still adjusting the bandana around his head, his back to her. The black leather of his vest creaked as he moved, and the silver skull on his belt buckle glinted in the afternoon sun. He looked exactly like the kind of person her mother warned her to stay away from. But Lily had seen something else in his eyes when he'd first pulled up. A fleeting kindness that belied the tattoos and the scowl. Gathering every ounce of courage she possessed, Lily took a tentative step forward. The gravel crunched under her worn sneakers, a sound that seemed deafening in the sudden quiet. Rex paused, his movements stilled. Slowly, he turned his head, his gaze dropping to her. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed slightly. Well, well, he rumbled, his voice a low growl that vibrated in her chest. "Look what the cat dragged in. Lost, little one?" Lily shook her head, her brown pigtails bouncing. She held out the $5 bill, her arm trembling slightly. The paper was warm from her grip. "Mister," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of the refrigerators inside the convenience store. Will you please help me with something important?" Rex's stern expression softened into something akin to amusement. A faint smile, quick as a flash of lightning, touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He leaned back against the polished chrome of his bike, arms crossed over his massive chest. The sheer size of him, the breadth of his shoulders, could have swallowed her whole. Yet a strange calm settled over Lily. He didn't seem angry. "Something important, huh?" he repeated, his gaze flickering from her earnest face to the outstretched bill. A hint of a chuckle, dry and gravelly, escaped him. "And you think $5 is gonna solve it?" He pushed himself off the bike, a looming shadow that eclipsed the sun. He reached out a hand, surprisingly gentle, and plucked the crumpled bill from her fingers. His thumb, scarred and calloused, brushed hers for a fleeting second. Lily nodded, watching as he folded the money neatly and tucked it into the breast pocket of his vest. The gesture, so casual, yet so deliberate, gave her a sliver of hope. She watched his face, searching for any sign of dismissal, but all she saw was a flicker of genuine curiosity. "All right, kid," Rex said, his voice losing some of its earlier gruffness. "You got my attention, and my $5. What's so important that a tough guy like me needs to get involved?" He squatted down, bringing his face closer to hers, though still towering over her. The scent of leather and something vaguely metallic, like oil, filled her nostrils. Up close, his eyes held a surprising depth, like dark pools reflecting the sky. Lily swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. This was the hard part. The words felt too big, too heavy for her small mouth. She looked past him, towards the dusty parking lot, then back to his expectant face. She could feel the weight of her mother's tears, the fear in her own heart, pressing down on her. It's about my mommy," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper, a delicate thread of sound that barely disturbed the quiet afternoon. Her eyes, wide and filled with an ancient sorrow, met his. "Please, mister," she pleaded, the words tumbling out in a rush, desperate and raw. Can you please make my daddy stop hitting my mommy?" The amusement drained from Rex's face as if a plug had been pulled. The faint smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. His eyes, which had held a spark of gentle curiosity moments before, turned to chips of flint. The air around them seemed to thicken, suddenly charged with an unspoken tension. He didn't move, didn't even blink. He just stared at her, the silence stretching between them, heavy and absolute. The world, for a brief, terrifying moment, seemed to hold its breath. Lily watched his transformation, the innocent hope she'd felt slowly giving way to a new fear. Had she said something wrong? Would he laugh at her, or worse, tell her to go home? But Rex's gaze, though intense, wasn't dismissive. It was something else entirely. A profound, unsettling stillness, like the calm before a storm. He remained crouched, his large hand resting on his knee, the knuckles white. The $5 bill, tucked securely in his vest, felt like a tangible promise, a sacred trust. A different kind of resolve, cold and unyielding, settled over Rex Miller. He would help. He had to. A heartbreaking plea. Lily's gaze fell from Rex's unyielding face to the scuffed, untied sneakers on her feet. The silence thickened, broken only by the distant thrum of traffic and a single sparrow's chirping from a nearby bush. She shifted, the crumpled $5 bill, now damp with nervous sweat, still clutched in her small hand. Her big, earnest eyes sought Rex's, pleading for understanding, for any sign he grasped the enormity of her plea. Rex, still astride, his roaring machine, observed her. His initial amusement, though not entirely gone, had given way to a flicker of curiosity. He'd witnessed countless desperate appeals, but never from such an innocent, diminutive figure. He waited, his unexpected patience a stark contrast to his imposing presence. Sunlight caught the chrome of his bike, momentarily dazzling Lily. She squeezed her eyes shut, then reopened them. Resolute. "Please," she began, her voice a fragile whisper, swallowed by the vast parking lot. She took a hesitant step, then another, until she stood before his massive boot. "Please make my daddy stop hitting my mommy." The words hung, stark and brutal, shattering the last vestiges of Rex's easygoing smile. It vanished as if it had never been, replaced by profound shock. The playful glint in his eyes darkened, reflecting a deep sadness that seemed to well up from within. The constant, reassuring rumble of his engine suddenly felt too loud, too aggressive. He cut it, the abrupt quiet amplifying the weight of Lily's request. His heart, accustomed to the street's hardened edges, ached with a sharp, unexpected pain. Lily's small, resolute face, etched with a wisdom far beyond her years, juxtaposed with her horrifying request, struck him like a physical blow. He saw not just a child, but a fragile beacon of hope, bravely reaching into the darkness that had enveloped her home. The $5 bill, still clutched in her hand, suddenly seemed less like payment and more like a desperate offering, a child's last resort in a world that had failed her. Rex dismounted, his movements slower, more deliberate. He knelt, bringing his imposing frame to her level, his leather jacket creaking softly. The scent of exhaust and worn leather, once intimidating, now seemed to soften, losing its harshness in the face of such vulnerability. His calloused hand, usually gripping handlebars or clenching into a fist, reached out tentatively, gently taking the crumpled bill from Lily's fingers. Her skin, almost translucent, felt soft in his rough palm. "Your daddy. He hits your mommy?" Rex's voice was a low, gravelly whisper, stripped of its usual gruffness. He searched her eyes for confirmation, for any sign he had misunderstood. But there was no mistaking the raw fear and desperate plea reflected in their depths. Lily nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her dusty cheek. She made no sound, but her tiny shoulders trembled. "Sometimes he yells too," she added, her voice still small but with a new edge of fear. "And mommy cries. I don't like it when mommy cries." Rex's jaw tightened. Cold, swift anger began to coil in his gut, displacing the shock and sadness. It was a familiar feeling, one he knew well from his days of protecting his own, of righting wrongs. But this was different. This was a child, broken and desperate, in a way that cut deeper than any knife. He looked at the $5 bill, then back at Lily. "You came to me," he said, his voice a low rumble, a promise forming. "You came to me for help." He paused, weighing his words, ensuring they carried the full weight of his resolve. "And I'm going to help you, Lily. I promise you that." He carefully folded the $5 bill and tucked it into the breast pocket of his vest, right over his heart. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about something far more profound, a sacred trust placed in his hands by a child who had nowhere else to turn. Lily looked up at him, a flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, blooming in her eyes. It was a silent conversation, a bond forged in an instant between a grizzled biker and a brave little girl. Rex knew, with an absolute certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his world and the world of his club had just irrevocably shifted. The road ahead was clear, grim, and absolutely necessary. A promise token. The departing semi's roar receded to a faint thrum, ceding the soundscape to the convenience store's ceaseless refrigeration hum. Rex, still reeling from Lily's innocent plea, felt the crumpled $5 bill warm his calloused palm. His reflexive amusement had evaporated, replaced by a grim set to his jaw. Though well acquainted with humanity's darker corners, this encounter pricked a different kind of wound. He knelt slowly, leather-clad knees protesting softly on the asphalt, bringing him level with Lily's wide, hopeful gaze. The lingering scent of exhaust on him starkly contrasted with the faint, sweet trace of candy she'd surely coveted inside. Up close, the smudges on her cheeks and the subtle redness around her eyes were more apparent. Yet her expression was one of resolute determination. "He hits your mommy." Rex's voice, usually a gravelly rumble, emerged surprisingly soft, almost a whisper. He watched her intently, every fiber focused, a knot tightening in his stomach. Lily's lower lip trembled, and she nodded, a solitary tear carving a clean path through the grime. It was a silent, unequivocal affirmation, a shard of ice piercing Rex's tough exterior. He registered not just the tear, but the faint tremor in her small, tightly clasped hands. The innocent faith in her eyes, the unwavering hope that this massive stranger might be her salvation, made his own chest ache. He swallowed, the familiar taste of grit and stale coffee unwelcome. "And you want me to make him stop?" he continued, his voice still low, probing not her understanding of the request, but of the inherent danger. He knew the breed of man who struck a woman, let alone in front of his child, a coward, a bully, a menace. Another small nod, more emphatic this time. "Please," she whispered, barely audible, yet heavy with unvoiced fears. She didn't flinch from his intensity, didn't shy from his stern mien. Instead, she seemed to draw strength, as if his seriousness validated her plight, making it real enough for someone else to care. Rex extended a hand, hesitating a moment before gently wiping the tear from her cheek with his thumb. Her skin felt surprisingly warm against his rough touch. A surge of protective fury, hot and fierce, eclipsed his initial shock. This wasn't a street brawl or a territorial dispute. This was a child, broken and desperate, reaching out. And whatever his past, whatever his reputation, he wouldn't turn away. "Okay, Lily," he said, his voice firming, the softness replaced by a deep, resonant certainty. "I hear you, and I promise you, I will help your mommy." He held up the crumpled $5 bill. "This," he continued, looking from the money to her eyes, "this is important. This is our promise token, understand? You gave it to me, and it means I have to keep my word." He folded the bill carefully, then tucked it deep into the breast pocket of his cut, right over his heart, a space usually reserved for club patches and cherished memories. The fabric felt heavy over the bill, a physical manifestation of his new burden. Lily's worried face softened. A small, tentative smile touched her lips, a fragile blossom of hope in the dusty parking lot. "You really will?" she asked, her voice still quiet, but with a new lightness. "I really will. Rex affirmed, meeting her gaze with an unwavering intensity that brokered no doubt. No one should hurt anyone, especially not someone they're supposed to love. And no one should hit a mommy. He paused, a different kind of fire igniting in his eyes. You go home now, Lily. Everything's going to be okay. But don't tell anyone we talked, all right? This is our secret for now. Lily nodded, a flicker of understanding in her young eyes. She seemed to grasp the gravity, the need for discretion. Small she might be, but perceptive. She gave him one last look, a silent thanks, before turning and scampering towards the battered sedan, parked a few spaces down, its passenger window slightly ajar. Rex watched her go, a cold, hard resolve settling over him. The image of her tear-streaked face, the innocent plea seared into his mind. He pushed himself to his feet, the pop of his joints loud in the sudden silence. The world, mundane moments ago, had shifted on its axis. The roar of his Harley, usually a symbol of freedom and defiance, now felt like a battle cry. He wasn't just Rex Bulldog Miller, enforcer for the Dragon's MC anymore. He was a promise keeper. And a promise to a child, a promise token held close to his heart, was the most sacred kind of oath. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the speed dial for Hammer. This wasn't a job for one man. This was a job for the club. Hope Bloom's Lily clutched the imaginary $5 bill in her palm, a tremor of something new, something beyond fear, stirring in her small chest. Rex, a mountain of leather and muscle, had bent low, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. He had taken her money, a sacred pact. He had promised. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible against the rumble of the idling motorcycles. Her eyes, wide and earnest, met his for a final, fleeting moment. There was a strange glint in his, not the usual amusement she saw in adults when they looked at children, but something deeper, like the shifting shadows in a deep well. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that somehow solidified the impossible hope blooming within her. "Go on, little one. Get home safe." Lily turned, her worn sneakers scuffing on the cracked asphalt. The weight on her shoulders, a constant crushing burden, felt momentarily lighter. The air, usually thick with the smell of exhaust and forgotten dreams, seemed to carry a faint sweetness now. The world, for the first time in what felt like forever, didn't feel entirely bleak. A tiny, fragile seed of belief had been planted, watered by a biker's unexpected kindness. She kept her gaze fixed on the uneven pavement, a small smile teasing the corners of her lips. The short walk home, usually an exercise in dread, felt different. Each step was a tiny rebellion against the fear that had dictated her life. The setting sun cast long, orange shadows, transforming the familiar street into something less menacing, more like a path leading to a possibility she hadn't dared to imagine. She didn't look back, but the presence of the big biker, a silent sentinel, lingered in her mind, a new kind of guardian angel. Rex watched her go, a strange knot tightening in his gut. The image of her earnest face, her desperate plea, was seared into his memory. $5, $5 to stop a monster." He let out a slow breath, the air whistling through his nostrils. The amusement had vanished the instant those words left her lips. Now, only a cold, hard resolve remained. This wasn't some street brawl or a territorial dispute. This was a child, broken and desperate, reaching out for help. And he, Rex Bulldog Miller, had taken her money, her trust. He would not fail her. He pushed off the kickstand with a grunt. the heavy Harley rumbling to life with a satisfying roar. He didn't mount it, though. Instead, he took a few deliberate steps towards the convenience store, not bothering to glance at the candy display or the coffee pots. His destination was the payphone bolted to the wall near the overflowing dumpster, a relic in an age of smartphones, but one that offered a certain anonymity. His fingers fumbled in his pocket, not for change, but for his own well-worn flip phone, an older model he preferred for its straightforwardness and reliability. He scrolled to a familiar contact, his thumb hovering over the name. Snake. Samuel Johnson. The club's vice president, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a steel-trap mind and an unwavering loyalty. Snake was the strategist, the one who could see angles others missed, who could organize chaos into effective action. The phone rang twice before a calm, even voice answered. "Rex, everything all right?" There was an underlying note of inquiry, a subtle sensing that something was amiss. Snake knew Rex rarely called just to chat. "No, Snake. Everything's not all right," Rex growled, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual good-natured bluster. He glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot, though the only other person nearby was a teenager absorbed in their phone. "I need you to get everyone to the clubhouse. Now. Urgent." There was a brief pause on the other end, a flicker of silence that spoke volumes. Snake wasn't one for dramatics, so Rex's tone immediately signaled trouble of a serious magnitude. "Everyone? You mean the full table?" Snake's voice remained even, but the question was precise, confirming the gravity of the request. "Full table," Rex affirmed, his gaze sweeping the street. "And tell them to be ready for, well, for anything. This ain't about territory or a bad deal. This is different. This is a promise." Another beat of silence. Snake's mind was already at work, piecing together the unusual urgency, the cryptic mention of a promise. He knew Rex's promises were sacrosanct. "Understood. I'll make the calls. Expect them there within the hour, 2 at most for anyone coming from out of town." "What's the short of it, Rex?" "The short of it," Rex began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that a little girl just paid me $5 to stop her old man from hitting her mother, and I took the money." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "We're not letting her down." On the other end, Snake's usually placid expression tightened. The gears in his mind shifted, reprioritizing everything. A child, abuse, Rex's personal involvement, sealed by a child's desperate offering. This wasn't just a club matter. This was a fundamental violation of their unwritten code, a direct challenge to the protective instincts that lay beneath their hardened exteriors. "Consider it done, Bulldog," Snake said, his voice now infused with a quiet, dangerous resolve. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Don't do anything stupid until we get there." Rex grunted, a sound of acknowledgement, and something akin to grim satisfaction. "No promises, Snake. Just get them here." He snapped the phone shut, the click echoing in the sudden silence. The $5 Lily had given him felt heavier than any gold coin. It was a burden, yes, but also a sacred trust, a beacon in the murky waters of his world. And for the first time in a long time, Rex felt a clarity of purpose that cut through all the noise. The Iron Riders assemble. The roar started as a distant rumble, a low thrum that vibrated through the very foundations of the Dragon's MC clubhouse. It grew steadily, a symphony of internal combustion engines building to a crescendo. Harleys, their chrome glinting under the afternoon sun, began to peel into the gravel lot, their tires kicking up dust like miniature storms. Each arrival was a statement, a testament to the urgency of Snake's summons. Choppers, cruisers, and stripped-down bobbers lined up with military precision, engines sputtering before falling silent, leaving an echoing quiet in their wake. Men dismounted, their leathers creaking, faces grim and expectant. They were a motley crew, some with beards woven with streaks of gray, others with the lean, hungry look of younger wolves. Patches adorned their vests, the snarling dragon, the club's emblem, prominent on every back. They exchanged terse nods, their eyes scanning the clubhouse for Rex, for answers. Rex stood at the head of the long, scarred oak table in the club's meeting room, his massive frame dominating the space. Snake stood beside him, his gaze sweeping over the assembled members, ensuring every man was present and accounted for. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of leather, oil, and stale beer clinging to the walls. "All right, listen up." Rex's voice, usually a gravelly rumble, was edged with a dangerous tremor. He slammed a fist on the table, the impact rattling the beer bottles that had been hastily set aside. This ain't no ordinary meet. This ain't about territory or rival clubs. This is about a promise made to a little girl. A ripple of murmuring went through the room. A little girl. This was a new one. Rex held up a crumpled $5 bill. It looked impossibly small in his calloused hand. This is what she paid me. $5 to protect her mommy. His eyes, usually a steely blue, burned with a righteous fury that silenced any further whispers. "Lily, that's her name. Maybe 7 years old, tiny as a sparrow, but with more guts than any man I've ever met." He launched into the story, his voice rising and falling with raw emotion, painting a vivid picture of Lily's desperate plea. He described her small hand, her earnest eyes, the heartbreaking simplicity of her request. "Please make my daddy stop hitting my mommy." The words hung heavy in the air, each one a hammer blow to the collective conscience of the dragons. Faces hardened, fists clenched. The easy camaraderie that usually filled the room was replaced by a simmering anger, a shared indignation that twisted every man's features. "Her old man," Rex continued, his voice laced with venom, "is a coward, a bully. He raises his hand to his wife, and that little girl sees it. She lives in fear, and she came to me for help." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "She came to us." Snake stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, a counterpoint to Rex's controlled rage. "This isn't just a random act of violence, brothers. This is a child reaching out, desperate for someone, anyone, to stand between her mother and a monster. We're the only ones she trusts enough to even ask." A chorus of growls and muttered curses rose from the bikers. Some shook their heads, unable to comprehend such cruelty. Others simply stared ahead, their jaws tight, picturing the scenario Rex had laid bare. "So, here's the deal," Rex stated, his gaze sweeping over each man, challenging them, urging them. "We made a promise to a child, and a dragon never breaks a promise." "Damn straight," a gruff voice called out from the back. "She put her faith in us," another added, his voice thick with emotion. "Nobody hurts a kid or their mother on our watch," shouted a younger member, slamming a fist on the table. The room erupted into a unified roar of agreement, a fierce wave of protectiveness washing over the hardened men. The individual anger coalesced into a singular, unwavering resolve. There was no hesitation, no debate. Lily's plea had struck a chord deep within their often hidden sense of honor and justice. Rex nodded, a grim satisfaction settling on his face. "Good, because we're not just going to make him stop. We're going to make damn sure he never does it again." and we're going to ensure Lily and her mother are safe, truly safe, from here on out. He looked at Snake, a silent understanding passing between them. Snake, let's get a plan in motion. Every man here has a part to play. The meeting room, moments before filled with simmering fury, now buzzed with a focused determination. The dragons had assembled, their iron will forged into a formidable force. For Lily and her mother, the cavalry had arrived, and they rode on thunderous engines, their hearts burning with a fierce, unwavering commitment. A plan of intimidation. The Dragon's MC meeting hall, once a cacophony of voices, settled into a low thrum of anticipation. Rex, propped against the scarred oak bar, scanned the faces of his men. Hard living and fierce loyalty had etched their stories there, now unified by a singular, burning purpose. Lily. All right, listen up. Rex's gravelly voice cut through the air. We ain't looking for a bloodbath. Lily's mama doesn't need more trauma. What we need is to put the fear of God and the dragons into this bastard. Snake, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward, his gaze sweeping their assembled brethren. We go in heavy, but no direct contact. The goal is to make him truly believe we could, if we wanted to. He needs to understand that if he ever lays a hand on that woman, or that little girl again, his life, as he knows it, is permanently forfeit. A chorus of guttural assents rippled through the room. These men, masters of implied threat, had built their very reputation on such pronouncements. First, intelligence. Rex continued, tapping a finger on the bar. Snake, I need everything on this daddy character. Name, address, work, habits. The full rundown. We need to pinpoint when he's home, alone, and most receptive to a persuasive visit. Snake nodded, already retrieving his phone. Consider it handled. I've got contacts who can unearth dirt faster than a gopher on espresso. Good. Now, the approach, Rex said, turning to the core group of Iron Riders, the club's most seasoned and intimidating members. We roll deep. No subtlety, no stealth. We want every neighbor, every passerby, every stray dog on that street to know the dragons have arrived. The roar of our engines should shake the very foundations of his miserable existence. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over their determined faces. But we stop short of physical contact. No punches thrown, no windows smashed. Not yet. We array our bikes, a gleaming wall of chrome and menace, right outside his house. We gather. We stare. Our presence will be undeniable. A younger member, a burly man named Diesel, spoke up. What if he calls the cops, Rex? Rex's lips curled into a slow, chilling grin. Let him. What's he going to say? A bunch of big, scary men are looking at my house. There's no law against looking, and when the patrol cars arrive, we'll be gone, leaving behind only the echo of what we are capable of. And the lingering question, Snake added, of when we might return. The plan began to crystallize, each man contributing a crucial detail. Timing was paramount. Late afternoon, as most people returned home, ensuring maximum exposure. A weekday was chosen, avoiding weekend distractions to amplify their sudden stark appearance. We need to make it clear this isn't a one-off warning, Rex instructed. This is a statement, an ongoing commitment. He needs to live with the knowledge that we are watching, always. That if he slips up, even once, the consequences will be far more severe than a simple scare. The air in the room thickened with grim resolve. The clinking of beer bottles and the low rumble of conversation transmuted into a focused energy. Mechanics began to prep their bikes, ensuring every engine would unleash its maximum fury. Leathers were donned, patches gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. We're not just protecting Lily and her mother, Rex said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying immense weight. We're sending a message to every scumbag who thinks they can get away with hurting the innocent. The dragons don't stand for it. A collective nod, a tightening of jaws, affirmed their agreement. They were more than a motorcycle club. They were a self-appointed force of rough justice. And today, justice had a name: Lily. As the first engines sputtered to life, a symphony of power and intent, the late afternoon light outside began to wane, casting long, ominous shadows. The Dragon's MC, a phalanx of steel and leather, was ready to ride. Their destination, a quiet suburban street where a little girl's $5 plea was about to unleash a storm. The sound of their imminent departure filled the air, a low, throbbing hum that promised a reckoning. The arrival. The late afternoon sun, a bruised purple and orange, bled across the sky as the first distant thrum reached Lily's ears. It was a low, guttural vibration, not yet distinct, but enough to make the small hairs on her arms stand on end. She was perched on the sill of her bedroom window, knees drawn to her chest, watching the quiet, tree-lined street below. The air in the room was still, heavy with a nervous anticipation that had clung to her since the morning. Then a glint of chrome caught the light at the far end of the street, followed by another and another. A wave of black leather and polished steel, moving with a deliberate slowness that was almost eerie, began to snake its way into view. These weren't the roaring, thunderous machines she'd heard from a distance before. These were like predators, silent and watchful, gliding with an unnerving grace. Each motorcycle, a behemoth of metal and power, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, casting long, menacing shadows that stretched and crawled along the pavement. Lily's breath hitched. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. This was different from the image she'd held in her mind, an abstract hope born of desperation. This was real. These men, clad in the same intimidating leather she remembered from the convenience store, were a formidable presence. Her small hands tightened on the worn fabric of her pajamas, a tremor running through her. What if they were bad? What if Rex had changed his mind? What if they hurt her mom or even her? The $5, clutched so tightly hours ago, now seemed laughably inadequate against the sheer, imposing force slowly approaching her home. But then, as the first few bikes drew closer, she saw him. Rex, his broad shoulders, his dark helmet, the way he held the handlebars with a quiet authority. There was no aggression in his posture, only a focused, unyielding resolve. His gaze, though hidden by his visor, seemed to sweep the street, taking in every detail with an almost predatory awareness. And as he passed under a street lamp, a faint glint of something silver caught her eye, near his vest pocket. For a fleeting second, she imagined it was the $5 bill, tucked away safe. A different shiver, this one warm and spreading through her chest, replaced the fear. This wasn't bad. This was them, her champions. The spark of hope, momentarily dimmed, flared brighter than before, chasing away the shadows of doubt. These were the dragons. The line of motorcycles was long, stretching back down the street, each one a testament to power held in check. They moved with an almost dreamlike stillness, their engines purring a low, uniform hum that vibrated through the ground and up into Lily's bones. It was a sound that promised, rather than threatened, a deep, resonant assurance. Neighbors' curtains twitched. A dog down the street, usually a boisterous barker, merely whined softly from behind a fence. The entire block seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, deliberately, Rex guided his massive Harley-Davidson directly in front of Lily's house. The chrome gleamed under the fading light as he brought the machine to a near-silent stop, the engine cutting out with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. He didn't dismount immediately. Instead, he sat there, a dark, motionless silhouette, his presence anchoring the entire scene. One by one, the other dragons followed suit, pulling up behind him, forming a perfectly spaced line that stretched from Lily's front yard to the corner. Each rider killed their engine with the same quiet precision, until the only sounds were the faint ticking of cooling metal and the distant chirping of crickets. No shouts, no laughter, no revving, just a silent, formidable congregation. Lily watched, transfixed. There must have been 20, maybe 30 of them. Each man sat astride his machine, a stoic guardian, their faces obscured by helmets or shadowed by the brims of bandanas. The dragons, in their silent vigil, had arrived, and they had come for her mother. The $5, she realized, hadn't just bought a promise. It had ignited a purpose. Rex finally moved, slowly raising his visor. His eyes, though shadowed by the twilight, seemed to scan the house, lingering for a moment on Lily's window. He didn't wave, didn't smile, but there was a subtle tilt to his head, a faint softening around his jawline that Lily, in her newfound understanding, recognized as a silent acknowledgement, a solemn vow. Then, with a deliberate motion, he dismounted, his boots hitting the pavement with a soft thud. The other riders remained on their bikes, a wall of silent support, their collective gaze now fixed on the house, on the street, on the quiet promise of what was to come. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, not of fear, but of an impending, unshakable justice. Lily felt a tiny, hopeful smile ghost across her lips. This was just the beginning, the confrontation. The front door of Lily's house creaked open, shattering the profound stillness that had settled over the cul-de-sac. Lily's father emerged, his face a mask of annoyance and belligerence. He fumbled with the screen door, his eyes still narrowed with the residue of an argument, probably with Lily's mom. His gaze swept across the street, expecting to find a nosy neighbor, or perhaps a kid who'd kicked a ball into his yard. Instead, his eyes landed on the silent, formidable assembly of motorcycles. His initial scowl faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He blinked, as if the dazzling chrome and leather-clad figures were an illusion. But they remained, solid and unwavering, under the amber glow of the streetlights. The confusion rapidly morphed into a pale, sickening dread. The color drained from his face, leaving his complexion ashen and his jaw slack. He looked like a man who'd just walked into a nightmare, every fiber of his being screaming a silent, terrified question. Rex, a towering figure even when still, pushed off his kickstand with a soft click that resonated in the sudden quiet. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his heavy boots crunching faintly on the gravel of the driveway. Each step seemed to amplify the tension, pulling it taut like a guitar string about to snap. The other dragons remained perfectly still, their engines off, their gazes fixed on the scene unfolding. It was a tableau of controlled power, of latent force poised to erupt. Lily, watching from her window, clutched the faded curtain. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming silence. Her father looked small and insignificant against the backdrop of the massive bikes and the men who rode them. A strange mix of fear and exhilaration churned within her. This was it. The moment she had paid for, the moment she had hoped for with all her innocent might. Rex stopped a few feet from Lily's father, his shadow eclipsing the man entirely. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even need to. His presence alone was a thunderclap. Lily's father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. He tried to speak, but only a dry, raspy sound escaped his throat. Rex's voice, when it came, was a low rumble, devoid of any discernible emotion, yet more menacing for its quietude. "You hurting your family?" It wasn't a question, but a flat, undeniable statement of fact. Lily's father stammered, attempting to recover some semblance of his usual bluster. What are you talking about? Who are you people?" He tried to puff out his chest, but the gesture was pathetic. A squirrel trying to intimidate a bear. Rex's eyes, usually sharp and assessing, narrowed to cold slits. "Doesn't matter who we are. What matters is what you do." He took another step forward, closing the remaining distance. Lily's father instinctively recoiled, bumping against the doorframe. The air crackled with unspoken threats. "You stop hurting your family," Rex continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Yet each word was delivered with the weight of granite. "Or you will have to answer to all of us." He didn't gesture, didn't need to. The implication hung heavy in the air, a palpable force. Lily's father's eyes darted past Rex to the phalanx of silent, imposing figures on their machines, their faces grim and unyielding. The sheer number of them, their unified, unblinking presence, was an unassailable wall of intimidation. A tremor ran through Lily's father. His bravado had completely evaporated, leaving behind only raw, naked fear. He looked like a man who had suddenly realized he was utterly, hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't an empty threat. These men weren't here for a polite conversation. They were here as a unified, unflinching judgment. Rex held his gaze, his expression unchanging, a silent promise of consequences. He allowed the weight of his words and the silent backing of his club to settle over the man like a shroud. The message was clear, unequivocal. This wasn't a warning to be taken lightly. This was an ultimatum, delivered with the cold, hard certainty of a force that could not be ignored. He had accepted $5 for a sacred duty, and the Dragon's MC, in their unified silence, stood ready to collect on the promise of protection. Safe at last, Lily's father, a man whose presence typically swelled the small house with bluster, now seemed to deflate before their eyes. His face, still mottled from the recent argument, was a stark canvas of terror. The color had leached from his complexion, leaving behind a pallid, almost translucent quality that erased any memory of his usual ruddy hue. His eyes, habitually narrowed in suspicion or anger, were now wide and skittering, like a cornered creature seeking escape. His gaze flickered between Rex's unyielding stare and the silent, resolute faces of the dragons, his Adam's apple visibly working. The air, heavy with gasoline, oil, and the faint metallic scent of fear, seemed to press in on him. I won't," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the booming shouts Lily was accustomed to. "I won't hurt them. Not ever again. I swear." He instinctively raised his hands, a gesture of surrender against an unseen blow. His eyes briefly swept over Lily, a fleeting flicker of what might have been shame or perhaps pure self-preservation, momentarily softening the terror before he averted his gaze, unable to meet the innocent accusation he imagined there. Rex remained motionless, a sculpture of contained power. He offered no words, no movement, but the intensity of his gaze never wavered. His silence was more formidable than any threat, a thick, suffocating blanket, pinning Lily's father in place. Behind Rex, the dragons stood equally still, a formidable wall of leather and muscle, their engines idling with a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, a constant, menacing reminder of their presence. That hum seemed to bore into Lily's father's bones, a physical manifestation of the immense pressure crushing him. Seconds stretched into an eternity, punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of the motorcycles and the distant chirping of crickets. Lily held her breath, her small heart pounding against her ribs. She watched her father, a complex storm of emotions churning within her. A profound relief blossomed with his capitulation, a fragile hope unfurling in her chest. Yet a deeper, darker corner of her felt a strange vindication, watching the man who had inflicted so much pain now experience a fraction of the fear he dispensed. It was a confusing, almost unsettling sensation for a child. Finally, Rex gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, but one of recognition. He knew, with an instinct honed by years on the streets, that the fear he'd instilled was real, profound, and likely indelible. The man before them had been thoroughly broken, not physically, but in a way that mattered more. His aggressive spirit extinguished, replaced by a desperate need for self-preservation. Rex had witnessed it countless times. The precise moment a bully realized they were no longer the biggest dog in the yard. He then shifted his gaze to Lily, a subtle alteration in his demeanor that only she seemed to notice. The hard lines around his eyes softened almost imperceptibly, and a faint, knowing smile touched the corners of his lips. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but conveyed a profound understanding. He gave her a slow, deliberate thumbs up, a gesture that spoke volumes without a single word. A silent promise fulfilled, a validation of her courage, a recognition of the desperate plea he had answered. Lily's breath hitched. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't realized how tightly wound she'd been, how much she'd been holding her breath until that instant. The thumbs up was a release, a confirmation that everything would be all right. A tiny, fragile smile touched her own lips, mirroring his. A silent conversation between the brave little girl and the gruff biker, with another almost imperceptible nod, this one directed at his club. Rex swung his leg over his formidable machine. The engine roared to life with a deeper, more resolute growl, a final punctuation mark to their message. One by one, the other dragons followed suit, their powerful bikes rumbling into motion. The ground vibrated beneath Lily's feet as the club, a rolling wave of leather and chrome, began to pull away. They moved with synchronized precision, a formidable force receding into the twilight. The air, which had been thick with tension, slowly began to clear, replaced by the lingering scent of exhaust and the faint, sweet smell of the evening. The roar of the engines faded into the distance, becoming a low hum, then a whisper, until finally only the familiar sounds of the neighborhood remained. The distant bark of a dog, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Lily felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her mother, her face still streaked with tears, but now etched with an overwhelming sense of relief and a glimmer of hope, pulled her into a tight embrace. Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, inhaling the comforting scent of her skin, a mix of familiar perfume and the faint saltiness of tears. This hug was unlike any other. It wasn't just comfort, it was safety. It was the feeling of being truly protected, truly cherished, for the first time in a long time. "Oh, Lily," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You were so brave. My brave, brave girl." Lily clung to her, feeling the warmth of her mother's body, the steady beat of her heart. The terror, the uncertainty, the overwhelming weight of responsibility she had carried began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The image of Rex's knowing smile and his reassuring thumbs up was imprinted in her mind, a symbol of a promise kept. As the last echoes of the motorcycles vanished into the night, Lily looked back at the empty driveway, then up at her mother. For the first time, the house, usually a place of fear, felt different. It felt safe. The darkness outside no longer seemed menacing. The world, for the moment, felt right. She knew, with the certainty of a child who had faced down a monster and won, that things would be different now. The kind biker, the gruff man with the gentle thumbs up, had kept his word, and because of him, and because of her own brave heart, they were finally, truly safe at last.